All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. There may be some that trickle in, but I'm excited to meet with you guys today. It's kind of hard after that session. I mean, that guy's such a great storyteller. He's so exciting, and so anyway, hopefully we can still have a good time, but it's a hard act to follow. So before we get started, I wanted to get a sense for who we have in our class. So I got to meet many of you before class started, but just kind of so you get to see who's in the class. How many of you are from the U.S. somewhere? Okay. And what school? You guys are all at BYU? Yeah, BYU. So strong Utah contingent here. Any of you from outside of the U.S. ever been to Utah? Do you know where Utah is? It's a little bit east of here and a little bit south. A lot bigger mountains, not quite as much rain. Okay. And those of you from outside of the country, where are you from?
Jamaica.
So Brazil, Jamaica. Okay, and how about yourself?
Texas.
Texas, okay, so another American here. And how many of you guys are studying in a business school? Like you're some kind of like a business major, MBA? Okay, how about you guys? What are you studying?
I'm studying MPhil in biotechnology at the University of the West Indies.
Great.
Law.
Law, awesome. And how about the two of you?
Computer science.
Computer science, okay.
She's knowledge exercise expert.
Okay.
She's doing a PhD today.
Fantastic. So quite a lot of diversity. And just to give you a little background about myself, so I initially had a degree in Master's in Accounting. I worked as a consultant in Silicon Valley, mostly with technology companies like Google. This was in the early 2000s, before Google was a public company. And so it was fun to see them transition and go from a small startup to a large company. And then I got my PhD at Cornell. I do a lot of research on innovation, entrepreneurship, technology. And so today we're going to be talking about one of the things that I think is perhaps the most critical step of the process that most entrepreneurs I work with end up struggling at and failing at to some extent. So before we get started, I want to do a quick exercise, and I'm going to have you guys kind of intermingle, because we've got some from the same teams. I want you guys to kind of spread out if you can. And what I want you to do is to get into a group of 3 or 4 people, depending on how many we have. And I want one of you to take the role of the interviewer, okay? We're just going to do a quick exercise. One of you is going to interview someone else in the group about your business idea. All of you have ideas and products you're working on. So interview that person as if you're doing some type of customer validation. And then the other person just act as a customer. You may not be the actual target customer, and that's okay, but just try to be honest and answer their questions. And then the other person, I want you to observe and kind of take notes of how the interview is going, some things that you notice in terms of the types of questions that the interviewer is asking, the responses, any nonverbal cues, how the interview seems to be going. So really quickly, get into groups of 3. Make sure you're with people that you didn't come here with, so you get to meet some other people today. And I'll give you just a couple of minutes to do the interview. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up your interview. So just finish whatever conversation you're on
So I know my wife, she does say like she doesn't spend enough time.
All right, you guys done?
Done.
Okay.
Because it's challenging.
You guys are ready back here? Okay. All right, so how did it go? Did the interviews go well? Let me see, who were the interviewers in each group? Okay, so for you guys that interviewed others, how was the experience? How did you feel like it went? Did you feel like you got information that was helpful from them?
Yeah, definitely got the information. I think the target market wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, so it was a little technical, so I had to just kind of pick their brain on who would be our target market. But yeah, every question offered was very valuable information.
Okay, so that's certainly an important fact, right? Before you even start the interview, doing the right sample selection process, you can try to get to the target customer. But as you demonstrate here, sometimes even non-target customers can give us useful information that can be helpful, right? What about back here? How did your interview go?
I thought it was good. Like, I got really lots of information about how he does the process today, and helped me understand better.
Okay. Anything that was difficult for you guys that interviewed? Was there anything that you thought was maybe awkward or maybe you would do differently?
I think I would like, it's Luciana, right? She seems just very, very, very kind, and so maybe giving me what I want to hear.
Okay.
I would like just pure honesty, like just to.
Okay. And what indication did she give you that might be the case? That maybe she was just kind of.
Give me what I kind of
Yeah.
wanted to hear. I think, just based on the question, I think she just, I don't know, just kind of seemed just pure, just kind of flop. Like, oh, this is great, this is great.
Okay, so maybe kind of general statements,
Yeah.
kind of fluffy.
I think so.
Okay. We'll come back to this later today because this is an important topic, central to what we'll be talking about. Any other challenges from the interviewer's perspective? Okay, he thought he was on it there.
No, he's not like,
Okay. So he actually said that he didn't really like the product.
He liked the product, he liked it, and
He would definitely use it.
but
Okay.
or couple with what was he needs to do more.
Okay. So interesting, right? What about from you that observed, the people that were the observers in your group? What did you notice?
So I noticed it was almost like a puzzle coming together. Like he'd ask a question and then there'd be a little part of it said. And then he'd ask
Okay.
another question and it would build until, he just kept asking and asking until he got the whole picture. He didn't immediately get the whole picture
Okay.
until he continued to ask a bunch of questions.
And how did you think that went? Did you think that was a good approach? Like, did you think that that made sense? Or would you have done it differently to try to get the whole picture out sooner?
I thought it made sense, except for if he didn't ask the right question, then he didn't get that type of information. So
Okay.
he might have missed a lot more it seemed like he got everything, but he might have missed something if he didn't ask the right question.
Okay. How about over here?
I think part of it is being from Brazil, there was a little bit of a communications issue
Okay.
and speaking way too fast for her to keep up
Okay.
with the question. And as an example, when he said, "Do you do extreme sports?" she answered about the sports she did rather than say, "No, I don't do extreme sports, I do regular
Okay.
sports." But when he asked the question about, "Do you do them in group or alone?" she said in group, which was what he was after, was that information.
Yeah.
And so I think the longer they spoke, the more comfortable they were, their eye contact became closer, and they were more together. And I didn't feel like it was a fluff image. I really think she said, we do things in group, and this would work.
Okay.
So I didn't think you were just being nice, were you? Okay.
Okay. So this is good though, right? Because I think you bring up a few key points, right? One is there's oftentimes cultural differences, and even within the same culture, there can be communication issues where, does everyone know what extreme sports are, or does everyone have the same meaning, right? Does extreme sports mean the same to me as it does to you? Right? Maybe not, right? So that could influence it. And even the perceptions of, is this a valid, are they telling me the truth or not? We kind of think so, but maybe, when you hear from the actual customer, yeah, maybe I was just trying not to hurt your feelings, right? Yeah.
So Samantha was the interviewer. Something I thought she did really well was to set the stage initially to determine if he was going to be an actual user of the product. And when she found that out, I think there was a challenge with the timing, the shortness of the interview, which led to jumping to, like, would you buy it a little too soon? Before I think the value proposition was understood. And so I felt like the answer was disingenuous. It was sort of a, sure, sure, maybe I would.
Okay.
He really didn't know yet, because he didn't know what he was buying, how much it was, didn't know much like just didn't know the value prop or what the product was well enough yet to make an honest answer.
Yeah, and so both of these comments also bring up the challenge of kind of setting the stage, right? I mean, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get warmed up, but sometimes the things we do to set the stage actually can create stumbling blocks for the interview down the road, right? If we create too personal of a connection, and then it makes it even harder for them to tell us the truth because now they like us more, right? So there's a lot of these issues. So today, you know, I'm going to talk about this aspect, right? If we were to boil down lean startup or nail it, scale it, or whatever you might want to call it, into one principle, for me, I would say that it's validating your ideas with customers, right? It's this idea that we're not going to sit in an office, write a business plan, build a product, and go and try to sell it. It's this whole movement of getting out of the building, right? The customer development process where we're trying to engage with real customers to validate our ideas. But as I've been teaching, the more that I work with students, the more I work with executives doing these same things, I start to notice that even individuals who are doing their best to get out into the world, to engage with customers, and do everything that these principles tell them to do, often find that people still don't want to buy their products. So let me tell you a quick story. I'm not as good of a storyteller as James, but last fall, I was in Miami, Florida. Had a group of executives from Latin America. They all worked at big companies. They were in charge of innovation in their companies, trying to develop new products to help their companies grow. And the first day, a woman came up to me and she said, "Professor, I am so frustrated because I spent all this time convincing my boss to adopt these principles, to adopt this customer validation model, to try to figure out the types of innovations we should pursue before we build them." And this was very different than what their company used to do. And she said, "The very first experience I had failed completely. It was a horrible failure. And now my boss wants to go back to the way we did things before." And so her example, she worked at a soup company. They made all kinds of soups. And she said, "We went out and we talked to every customer we could. We asked them about what they didn't like about soups currently and what they would change." You know what the top 2 responses were that customers said they wanted in soups? Any guesses?
Taste.
Taste? Yeah, so taste was on the list, but it was down lower.
No.
So they're health related, okay? So the top one was lower fat soup, and the number 2 was lower sodium, less salt, right? So these are healthier options of soup. So they're like, great, everyone says they love this. We go out and we build this line of healthy soups. We put them in stores. No one buys them. So why? They did everything right. They went out and talked to customers. This is exactly the product that customers wanted. Why isn't it selling?
Never asked them if they'd buy it. Had they ever asked
But they did ask them if they would buy it. Customers said, yes, I would buy this.
Tell me a story about the last time you bought something like this and why you bought it.
Okay.
That obviously couldn't have been asked.
Okay, so you're suggesting that maybe the type of questions they asked were
Well, I don't think that do I think that apple pie is good? Yep.
Okay.
And motherhood too? Yep.
Okay.
Great principle.
Okay.
I think we should have more of that.
Okay, so one of the key problems here is that our customers lie to us, right? It's not necessarily because they want to deceive us and they want to trick us. It's usually because they want to help us, or they feel like they want us to feel good. They don't want to hurt our feelings. And so most of these problems are really rooted in bias, right? Either bias on the consumer side or on our side as the interviewer. And in terms of bias, any of you guys familiar with certain types of biases? Any of you psychology majors or anyone heard about some of these? So it's quite fascinating. There's several biases that are very prevalent for entrepreneurs in particular. But I'll highlight just a couple. So one of the key ones that you are subject to as an entrepreneur, as an interviewer, is this idea of confirmation bias, right? And this is the tendency for you, because you're so excited about your idea, to go out and while you're validating with customers, to only pay attention or to overemphasize the positive and to discount or overlook negative signals, right? So we're going to kind of bias the information we pay attention to. We may also be overconfident or over-optimistic in terms of thinking that we're better than average, we're going to be more successful than all the others that fail. But our respondents also suffer from a host of biases. They may be, these are kind of more technical terms, but essentially, they don't want to hurt your feelings, right? They want you, if you're interviewing somebody, especially if it's your friend or your mom, right? She doesn't want to hurt your feelings. If we called up my mom right now and told her the stupidest idea we could come up with, what do you think she'd say? She's like, that's a great idea. Yeah, that sounds really cool. And maybe you could do this with it, and maybe you could add this feature, right? So they want to please us. They may also not want to look bad themselves, right? So think about the soup. How many of these people say, I want a more fatty soup. I want something that's less healthy, right? That, in an interview setting, how many of you are actually going to admit to that? Right? You're going to say, oh yeah, I want to be more healthy, And all of us are biased in the sense that we will project our future actions to be more noble or to be more positive than our present. So if I survey this room and ask you how many times you're going to exercise next week, most of you will say, pretty much every day. I'm going to get up early, 5 times a week. I'm going to exercise every day, probably 6 next week actually. And then if I follow up next Sunday, how many of you will have actually done that, right? That's why memberships for gyms rise so dramatically in January and then they're empty by March, right? So all of us see ourselves as being more positive. Sure, I'd buy this product. Yeah, absolutely, I would use this, right? But that may be us just trying to make ourselves look better. We may also just want to appear consistent. If we said something earlier or we're doing something in our lives, we may not want to say something that makes us look like a hypocrite, right? That makes us look inconsistent with, we believe one thing, but we're doing something else. So all of these are challenges that we, as entrepreneurs, are going to struggle with in terms of our validation efforts. Because all of these can be traps that lead customers to give us information that's not accurate, or can lead us to process information in ways to come up with suboptimal decisions. So ultimately our goal is to get valid data. In one sense, I think that going out and just doing a whole bunch of interviews or surveys and getting bad data is much worse than no data at all. Why do you think that's the case?
It means you do bad, incorrect things.
Yeah, now I'm even more emboldened. Now I'm like, look, this is a horrible idea, but everyone I've talked to loves this, right? So now I'm even more encouraged that this is the right path to follow, but it's because I'm using faulty data. And so that's the biggest trap. Whenever I hear students in my classes or elsewhere say that everyone loves this, it's the biggest red flag right there. Because not everyone is going to love every product, right? And if everyone does, that means that it's either too generic or you didn't ask things in the right way. So let me just give you a few quick tips. And you could get a PhD in research methodology that would really dive into all these tips. But there's actually a very simple book that I found that's pretty helpful. It's called The Mom Test. And it's this idea of how can you pitch an idea to your mom, right? And keep her from lying to you. Because if anyone's going to lie to you, it's going to be your mom. So one tip. First of all, when you're going out and trying to validate, especially the pain, right? You're trying to find if this is really a problem. Focus on learning and not selling. What happens if I come to you and start saying, hey, I've got this awesome product, and it does this, and it does this, is this something you'd use? Right now I've already started to sell you on this, and it makes it very hard for you to say no, right? So focus on learning. We want to learn about the customer. We don't want to be pitching our idea, right? All the storytelling techniques that he just presented are fantastic when it's time to sell. But when you're trying to learn, you want your customer to tell the story to you, right? So focus on that. The second is try to be informal. There's something about just having an informal conversation with somebody as opposed to a formal interview that facilitates more honest feedback. Let me give you one example. I had a student team that was working on a product that was a ski jacket. It was an innovation with replaceable sleeves and components for a ski jacket. Now, where do you think they would go to interview customers? Yeah, so they went to ski resorts, and they used it as a good excuse to miss a lot of classes that semester for doing their homework on the ski resort. So they would sit on the chairlift. Do you all know what a chairlift is? Yeah, Jamaica, they probably don't have a chairlift, right? Do you know what a chairlift is? So when you go skiing, you go up a mountain, and you sit on a chair, and it takes you up the mountain. So the whole time...
But it's like a three-person chair. 3 people will sit on it, so you can have a conversation going on.
And they can't leave, because they're stuck up in the air, right? So they're stuck with you. So this was a great opportunity for them to do market research. What they would do is they would sit on the chair and just say, hey, I love your jacket. Where did you get it? You know, when did you buy it? And, oh, why did you buy it there? And they got to ask informally a lot of questions so that there's no reason for the person to lie to them, right? Because the person doesn't even know that they're interviewing them about this product. It's very informal. They're just telling them about the last time they bought their jacket, right? So this isn't going to work in every scenario. Some of your products, this is harder to do with, but to the extent that you can be more informal, that often brings down the chances that your customer is going to try to tell you something that they think you want them to say. And finally, be specific. So what was your name again? Ed. Ed. So Ed actually mentioned earlier about this question that the soup company could have used about, tell me about the last time you did this, right? Why might asking about specific experiences lead to more objective responses as opposed to more subjective or opinion-based responses with other types of questions?
They're creating their own story about the experience they had.
Okay.
And it puts them more at ease. Every time I come to the States with my kids, they ask me this question, how many children do you have? I have to turn around and count them to make sure I don't get it wrong. There's this whole thing in the formal interview, you want to get it right because there's some consequence you sense of being wrong. In this setting, there's probably no right or wrong answer. You're at ease.
Yeah.
You can see the picture in your head and you can talk about it. You can explore it.
Great, yeah, and if I'm just telling you a story about the last time I did something or about, a certain process that I go through, I'm just explaining facts. I'm not giving you opinions that are going to hurt your feelings, right? It doesn't matter to you if I process payroll by entering this form first. You don't care about that. It's not something where a customer is going to feel like they're obligated to tell you something or that they were going to look better in a certain light by telling you something. So let's just go through a few examples. And I want you to tell me whether or not you think this question that I put up here would lead to a more biased or a less biased answer from a customer. Okay? So what about this one? More biased, less biased? Okay? Yeah, less biased. We just talked about this. But getting them to walk you through an experience, right? What do you think of this idea?
More biased.
Why? Yeah, this is probably one of the worst, right? But it's probably one of the most frequently asked. If we were to aggregate data on the questions you asked, this is probably the most common, but probably the most detrimental. Because what do you think of this? Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Why don't you keep me posted on how it goes, right? That's what people are going to say. Or they're going to say, oh, well, that's cool. And then they'll jump to a feature. Well, could it do this or could it do that? Yeah, okay. Right, so that's problematic. Would you buy a product like this? More or less biased?
More.
More? Okay. Why?
Kind of similar to the one before.
But here I'm asking kind of specific. Would you buy this?
Because you feel the pressure. Because if I say no, but why not?
Okay.
And I don't want to deal with that, so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's so there's multiple factors here, right? One is the pressure. I went into a mattress store last year, and I was just, I figured it would be like $1,000 to buy a mattress at the high end. They're trying to sell me this like $10,000 mechanical bed that moves all around, and the guy's putting the pressure on me, and he's like, so are you going to buy it? Do you want me to put it on hold? I'm like, probably. Why don't you just keep it for me and I'll come back. You know, do you think I ever went back? No, right? It was just that I felt so pressured that, you know, what am I going to say to this guy, right? The other thing is, again, as I mentioned, we project ourselves doing things in the future that we may not necessarily do today. So saying I'm going to buy something and actually doing it are two very different things, okay? How are you dealing with this problem now? What do you think about this question?
Last slide.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I really like this is because this question, what happens if they say, oh, nothing really? What's that tell you? Yeah, if they're not even searching for a solution for this problem, it's probably a pretty good indicator that it's not a very big problem, right? If they aren't doing something to address it now or actively searching for an alternative, it's a pretty big red flag for you. What else have you looked into? Kind of similar to that previous one, right? How about this one? Could you see yourself?
Future.
Okay. Yeah, we taught a case in New York. We went to the Tesla dealership. It was a case on Tesla and innovation. And they let us all test drive their cars. It was kind of fun in New York City, right? You're driving around. But most of the participants were French and they weren't accustomed to driving in New York, so it was kind of scary to begin with. But then when we were leaving, the salesperson was like, yeah, so could you see yourself driving one of these? And what's my answer? Well, sure, I could see myself doing it. That doesn't mean I'm going to spend $200,000 on this car, you know, and I could see myself doing a lot of things, like retiring on an island in the Caribbean, maybe going and visiting my friends in Jamaica, right? But I probably won't necessarily do that. Okay, so that's a few tips on things that you can do to minimize some of the biases that your customers may have. But now, the other pitfall that I see students and others falling into is that they go out and they spend all this time collecting data, interviewing people, and then what do they do with it? Usually nothing. They come back and they think, yeah, everyone liked this, so I'm going to move forward. But very seldom do I see people actually systematically processing the data more like a scientist would, right? So after you go and you spend all the time to ask these questions, to gather reliable data, the next step is finding a way to actually codify that data. Compare notes with your teammates if you're interviewing people together. And then turn that into an actual database. This is something that I've seen students oftentimes be ready to kill an idea and pivot to something else. And then they look at their data and find that there's a new opportunity that they had overlooked. But they didn't realize it until they looked at their data. So let me just skip to this. So here's an example. This was a student team that was trying to develop a product for diapers. Any of you have children? Anyone here? Do you like dealing with diapers?
That's my favorite.
Yeah. So a lot of people love diapers, right? But there's a lot of problems. So they were like, okay, we want a better way to handle diapers because they smell bad and all these things. So they went out, they interviewed all these people. This is a sample of the data set that they constructed. Do you notice any trends? I'll give you one clarification. This level of pain is something that they assigned. They didn't ask people. They used the information they collected and they coded each person's level of pain based on how they respond.
Does the Genie make diapers disappear?
So Genie is an existing product. It's like this fancy garbage can that you twist it and then it seals off the diaper. Right? So these are what they're currently doing. What do you notice in terms here of who seems to be experiencing the greatest pain?
Double back.
Okay, so the people who are using double bag are also high levels of pain. But what else? How would you identify those people?
They're young.
Okay, young maybe. Okay, so 21 here, 20. But this one's fairly older, right? 39, and they're pretty high.
Not many kids.
Okay, not many kids.
One.
Yeah, so that was actually it, right? It was that they realized that it's a real trend with first-time parents. So they were initially kind of discouraged and thought, people don't really like this, the average level of pain is pretty low. But then when they sliced the data, because they had a database where they could actually see it, they realized that actually there is a trend here. And it's for first-time parents. Because once you've had a couple of kids, it's like, a diaper is a diaper, who cares, you know? But it's the first-time parents who are like, oh, you know, I've never dealt with a diaper, I'm scared of this. And one of the other things they noticed was that also, by looking here, they also noticed that men were experiencing this problem. They initially thought it was only women, but actually in many cases they realized that men were the ones who were more concerned because they didn't have experience babysitting when they were younger or tending children. So by codifying the data and actually putting it in this format to analyze, they were able to understand some other trends. So that's one thing to do after you actually go out. Another thing that's really a helpful method to avoid bias is if you can go out and do actual observation, right? It's hard for people to lie to you if you're just watching them do something and you're watching what's problematic about their process. So I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of different parts of the world and businesses in different places. This was an old picture in a carpet factory in Egypt. If I were to interview people about the carpet factory, I would have never, I mean, even just looking at this picture, you can see so many aspects of what's going on here and the environment in which they're making these carpets that would not be communicated in an interview, right? They probably wouldn't talk about, you know, the fact that there are kids doing it, they're on the floor, they're sitting on these dirty conditions. There's a whole host of things that wouldn't come up probably in an interview. So observations if you can, and surveys. How many of you guys use surveys? Okay? And surveys can be really useful. I see students, you know, often jumping on surveys and they get so excited because they can get hundreds of responses very quickly. And so while I think surveys are a good opportunity, they are particularly challenging to design in a way to avoid bias for a couple of reasons. First is, if it's your first step, before you've talked to any customers, how are you going to know what questions to include on the survey, right? You're just guessing and you're going to miss out on a lot of critical information if your very first approach is just sending a mass email to 1,000 people asking them to fill out a survey. Another thing is the structure. There's a real science to how you structure your questions. There's a process of priming, right? If I ask a certain question up front, that may get you thinking in a certain way, so you always respond based on how I've primed you to respond. It's a very powerful mechanism. Any of you have heard of the studies about the students being primed with discussions with elderly people? Anyone know that one? So they took a group of students, two different groups. In one group they talked about a lot of things related to old people. They talked about Florida and places you retire and things like that. Another group they didn't. They talked about just normal things. They timed how fast both groups left the room. And the group that was primed with thoughts of elderly people walked significantly slower as they left the room and did other things throughout the day. So even something as subtle as that can have these very big impacts, but they're particularly strong in a thing like a survey when you're ordering your questions. So if you're doing surveys, there's a couple resources. This Qualtrics University is a good source to look for some guidance on how you would actually structure a survey, types of questions that may be more or less biased, types of ways you could order it. They've got some tools there to check out. And I'll kind of skip this part, but you can have these slides if you want. This comes from a book, the Heath brothers on decision making, and it gives you a few different tests from your perspective to overcome things like overconfidence or confirmation bias that may limit the way that you're processing information. So that's a good book, and here's some resources. And so just in summary, so if you're to boil this down, right, there's a lot of complex things you can do, but the very simple way to get valid data by avoiding bias is first not selling initially, right? Just focusing on the customer, learning, getting them to tell their story to you. Trying to be informal if you can, right? Creating an environment where they may not even know that you are interviewing them about your business idea. and then focusing on very specific experiences, getting them to tell you about the last time they did something. And then on your side of things, if you can actually codify that data, turn it into something that you can analyze, put it in a database, and so forth, and then use some of these methods to look at it more objectively and try to recognize that you are likely to be subject to the tendency to only look at the positive and not consider some of the negative feedback. This can help you to avoid some of those things. So, in just, I think maybe what we'll do, I think they want us to be done by about 10:02. So maybe as you go, if you have people in here from your team, think about the next big assumptions that you need to test with your customers, right? And think about how you can structure those tests in a way to prevent your customers from just telling you what they think you want them to say, or to prevent them from giving you biased answers. So think about a couple of key questions that you could ask and how you would design those tests. And good luck throughout the remainder of your couple of days here, and good luck with your projects going forward. So thanks.